Yeah. $1,000. Yeah, $1,000.
It's very hard for us to stand. Who is that?
Andrea, it happened when you started to sit down.
Somebody's. Maybe it's me.
Is that a...
Somebody's phone is.
Oh, somebody is trying to... Hello.
That was the bell.
How are you? Hi, how are you? What's your name? What's your name? Stand up. What's your name? Oh, Zayden. Come on.
Zayden, you come say hello.
Who are you with?
Here's my nephew.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, you're the...
Yeah, I'm Lindsay. Lindsay Wells. Nice to meet you.
You're right here? She's right here?
No, my mom.
Half the
What is
time.
she?
She's at home.
But she got you now. She take you out then, okay?
He has two moms. He's got his mom, and then his mom is my sister. So I'm his aunt.
Where are you going?
South Carolina.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Mama number one.
Do you have Chromebook in school?
Mama number two.
Yeah.
Do you have Chromebook in school? You don't have a Chromebook?
Chromebook?
Oh, no, it's a supercomputer. I like the 5G.
Yes.
And it communicates and there's a big window and it's sharing computer. It's like a bathroom. You don't go to the bathroom.
I gotta give you something.
I'm one of the people.
Oh, interesting. Wow.
Okay, but you still haven't answered me yet.
I don't
They
know.
brought up, yeah, Leo, I worked in public health.
See, I mean, healthcare, whenever I say resources.
Know that. So Angie, that's right. You lived there for 2 years.
He decided many years ago that he would not
Here, let me persuade you. You and I are but I have more
It's even worse.
And I most likely won't be working with chickens.
Let me tell you what. If you cry in your class,
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
It seems like we're going to start. You can have your coffee or your water, then have a seat. And yeah, I know you want some coffee. Yeah, so thank you so much for being here. Thank you for joining TASSC and the Ugandan community for this event. My name is Leon, I'm the Executive Director of TASSC International. We are a non-profit organization in Washington, D.C., helping torture survivors. So we are very, very interested in this activity because of the work of this wonderful man, Nicholas, trying to defend the human rights here in Uganda, not only in Uganda, but around the world. So I'm going to welcome Karim, the organizer, to tell you the purpose of this activity very quickly, and then we're going to welcome Nicholas here. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody, for coming, and thanks for TASSC for hosting us. I think we can come a little bit closer. Okay. The purpose for having this event is to help put the situation in Uganda and on the continent in perspective when it comes to human rights and democracy. We are very privileged to have our own human rights and civil liberties lawyer, Nicholas Opiyo, and he's going to help us give us an idea of what is going on ground and what our role should be as people in the diaspora in advocating and keep pushing the fight for democracy and justice on the continent. Nicholas Opiyo is a renowned civil liberties lawyer. He's been working for quite some time, and he's also a founder for Chapter for Uganda. He has been teaching at Stanford University in California for the past 3 months. And I'm glad to introduce him to you all. Thank you so much, Nicholas, for taking the time and coming.
Hi friends, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
Let me start by apologizing for sitting here. I would have loved to stand. But,
You can stand if you want.
This is being streamed live, so...
No, you can stand actually, if you
great.
want. Yeah.
Great, all right, so I'll stand. But let me say, first of all, thank you very much to Karim. When Karim learned I was at Stanford, he couldn't stop pestering me to come here. It was difficult to find time to come because I have classes to teach. And so it took me a while to try to figure out when I could come. But the spring break at the university offered a good opportunity for me to get away for about a week. And so thank you very much, Karim, for never giving up on the idea of me coming here today. Let me thank TASSC and Leones, our brother as well. He paid for my ticket to come here. So thank you very much, Karim and Leones, for all the efforts to get me here. I am delighted to share the afternoon with you. I am even more delighted to see all of you turn up on a weekend when for the first time this week the sun is up. This is beautiful. Many things you could have been doing. But to come here and share this moment is gratifying, so thank you. I was able to see my sister who has long lost the Luo language in the US, but I hope to encourage her to speak more Luo perhaps in the future. So thank you very much for coming. As Karim mentioned, I work for a very small organization, I like to call it very small, called Chapter for Uganda, based in Kampala. Our principal work is to defend civil liberties in the country and on the continent. And so we're just a bunch of lawyers providing pro bono legal support for individuals and groups facing violations of their rights. We worked with members of the civil society, members of the media, worked with members of pro-democracy groups. Until the end of last year, we were providing pro bono legal support to perhaps somebody well known to you guys here, Stella Nanzi, who is in jail. We have been providing legal services to People Power Group in Kampala, representing hundreds of young people who perhaps the media doesn't report about them, but who are facing trumped up charges in the country. So what I'll do is simple. I don't want to assume that you want to listen to me. I want to hear from you, ask questions. So I'll keep it very brief in terms of setting the pace for this discussion. The first is to just highlight to you what I see as the current situation in Uganda and what's happening. Some of the nuances, some of the things that are happening that perhaps you only read about in the newspapers, but that we deal with every day in our work, in our office, that I have to respond to every day on email, on social media. And then I will attempt to try and outline to you what I see as the role of the Ugandan diaspora in the fight for democracy, rule of law, and respect for human rights, not just in Uganda, but on the continent. And I'll end by just a short plea to all of you. So let me start by just outlining the context of what is happening in Uganda now. Even though elections are nearly 2 years away, it feels like we're in full-blown election time in Uganda. Because the event happening is setting ground for a political contestation from all the actors, the ruling party to the opposition. And so it doesn't feel like we are in normal times anymore. It feels like we're in election mode. And a couple of things have happened that raise concerns. And I'll start by the event happening with the ruling party. If you have studied President Museveni over the years, you know that when he's preparing for elections, a couple of things will happen. The first is we begin by massive promotion within the army, often involving close family members and close associates. This is portrayed normally as a normal process of promotion within the army, but in fact, for electioneering, because many of the army generals who are promoted are oftentimes assigned roles in their regions where they come from. In the last election, many of us know the role played by people like the commandant of the reserve force in the north, Otema, who led the campaign for the NRM in northern Uganda. We know the roles played by people like the deputy commandant of Operation Wealth Creation in TESO, leading the campaigns to go to TESO to mobilize support for the ruling party. And so these promotions are not just promotions in and of themselves, but an early preparation, aligning of the ducks by the ruling party to be able to win the election. The second thing that normally happens is what you see as revitalization of the veterans movement. The hundreds of people who are army veterans all of a sudden become a very important factor that we tend to mobilize. And so you hear things such as we are paying areas of the veterans, we are doing head counts of veterans. And so these things have begun to happen in ways that would show you that it's the same script that is being used. The third one is the recruitment of paramilitary groups. The last election saw the massive recruitment of crime preventers, ostensibly to provide better security in villages and neighborhoods. The numbers are not exactly known, but as I say, 11 million. I think it's not 11 million. I think it's less than 1 million. But they are so widespread, and their work was simply to organize support for the ruling party in villages. What we've seen this time is the recruitment of what they call LDUs, local defense units. They have been recruited, they have been trained, they have been deployed to go to villages. And so these are early signs of preparations for elections. And the LDUs are just the new crime preventers that have been this time recruited. The last one is what you then see as innocent attempts by lower level ruling party MPs encouraging Museveni to contest as a sole candidate. It is portrayed as a very innocent, people-driven initiative. But in fact, it's a very choreographed attempt to try and shield the ruling party from contestation within its ranks. The calls for sole candidate, the calls for non-contestations then become louder and louder. Now, what are the implications of these events within the NRM? The first implication is then that you have an active attempt to shut down active democratic discussions within the ruling party. You then have people who are labeled rebel MPs being locked out of discussions, being called enemies of the party, and attempts to try and exclude them in the sense to show the cost of dissent within the ruling party. You also then have that sending a very strong message to other people within the ranks of the party that if you do not play game, this probably will happen to you. But on the wider scale is then you have these party vigilantes who have been recruited and sent around the village, beginning to use the instruments of force to not just intimidate, but in many cases suppress people they see as mobilizers for people who are opposed to the ruling party. In the case of crime preventers, they just went around the villages intimidating people. But in the case of the LDUs, we're yet to see what they will do. But I doubt that their actions will be any different from the actions of the crime preventers in the past. But on the second level, what you then see is the increased involvement of the army in what is ordinarily civilian activity. The army is effectively in charge of the police, both in terms of command, but also in terms of operational conduct. You have to go to any police station and see the amount of army deployment, whether it is on the back of a pickup to patrol a neighborhood. It's being done and commanded by the army. Police simply provides a veneer of legitimacy. And so you have the intelligence agencies actively involved in not just investigations of crime, but the enforcement of ordinary law and order. Hundreds of people have been detained in what we know as illegal detention facilities. And I'll give you just two of them for purpose of illustration, because we spend time following them and getting them out of those houses. The first is what I see as an ISO detention facility. All of us know about it in Kampala, all of us speak about it, but all of us cannot do anything to close it. That the ISO director runs a detention facility in the area of Busega. The people who have come out of that facility will tell you many people are being detained there at any one time, at least 50 people. They will tell you of heinous violations of rights within that facility. Besides being illegal and people being detained incommunicado and unable to access the family, the doctors, the lawyers, they are subjected to beatings, to torture, to all forms of rights violations. It is now not uncommon for ISO to be investigating even a case of theft in Kampala, as long as the case involves somebody who is seen as belonging to the opposition in Uganda. So they run a detention facility in which people are being tortured, people are being detained every day, and nobody can do anything about it. The sad thing is that the people, the victims who survive that place, all they want is to just get out and get their freedom. Nobody wants to stick their neck out, to go to court, to petition court, to say that I was there, I was beaten, I was tortured. The second house that is being used as a detention facility, and this one is being used by the Chieftaincy of Military Intelligence, is in the heart of the city, what was called SIU Chireka. A few years ago, that was a police facility being run by the SIU, which is the Special Investigations Unit of the police. But towards the election of 2016, the police was asked to go to Nalufenya. So the commandant of the facility was ordered to move his troops and forces to Nalufenya. Now the story of Nalufenya is well known to all of you. It became a dungeon, of some sorts. But as soon as they left for Nalufenya, the facility in Chireka was then taken over by the CMI. and they began to use that place as a place for detention. Many people have been to that place. You probably have heard the case of Yasin Kawoya, who was beaten in broad daylight. He was detained there for many hours. Besides Yasin Kawoya, there were other people who were on that same day arrested, including a 23-year-old Ugandan lady who prefers to have her name kept out of the public. Beaten, arrested, taken there on suspicion of being a member of, people power. So the facility in Chireka is now being used by CMI. It is commanded by a gentleman called Kano Ashimwe. Now, anybody who has read the history of torture in Uganda will have read about Kano Ashimwe. He's very notorious for his creative, quote-unquote, methods of torture in the city. So the facility is divided into two. If you go into Chireka now, because Nalufenya was closed, SIU came back to the same place. On the right hand are office spaces where officers of SIU sit. If they want to detain suspects, they have to detain their suspects at Ginger Road Police Station, at Kira Road, and other facilities. They cannot use SIU because SIU is now in the control of CMI. On the left hand of the facility, which is now a place cordoned off with iron sheets, is the place where CMI detains people now. There are people who have been there for close to a year, close to 2 years, being detained by CMI. And nobody has access to the facility. What happens is then, if you are lucky to know that the person is being detained, then you can go and make enough noise about it. They will always hand over that person to the police. Then the person will be released on bond. That's exactly what happened to Yasin Kawoya. When we traced and discovered that he was being detained on the orders of CMI at SIU Chireka, we were able to impress upon them that we were going to court if they couldn't release him. He was handed over to SIU Chireka. SIU Chireka then gave him a bond on the instructions of CMI. It took us 3 days to go back and forth to the CMI headquarters in Mbuya Hills. Those of you who know Kampala know that the Mbuya Hills CMI house is less than a kilometer from SIU Chireka. So going back and forth, to even have a visit to speak to him, we had to get the express permission of the CMI director, Kano Kanduro. And so you see the increased involvement of the army and intelligence agencies in investigations of crime, and what that meant is, increase in human rights violations. Now we speak about high-profile people who have been arrested because the media covers them, right? We know about the Arua people, we know about people arrested in Ginger during the by-election. But there are hundreds of other people who are unknown, who are unreported, who are being arrested. So the use of arresting powers to persecute people they perceive as pillars of organization in society is commonplace. And then we've spent countless hours rescuing faceless, unknown little individuals who are being arrested by the regime in Kampala. The second level of concerns we have is the question of the limitation of the space to organize. Physical organization in Kampala is becoming increasingly difficult if you are seen as opposed to the government of President Museveni. So you cannot organize a peaceful demonstration. Many of you who live here enjoy the liberty to organize demonstrations as and when you want to do so. But in Kampala, it's impossible to organize a demonstration, even if it is a peaceful demonstration, because you have to get the written permission of the Inspector General of Police. So the Public Order Management Act, which is a law they passed a couple of years ago, says that you have to notify the police. But in fact, and in practice, the provision for notification is being used as administrative permission to organize. And so you cannot organize a rally, you cannot organize anything unless it's clear to the police. And I'll give you an example of what happened 3 days ago. A young man I've been helping for the last 4 years organized a fundraising function for a local primary school in his neighborhood. And he had put my name as a guest of honor. You know, I invited people in the school that allowed him to organize a fundraising event to build a classroom. In minutes, the RDC learned about the fundraising event. He wrote to the school administration cancelling the event, saying it is going to be a platform for opposition politicians to criticize government. So the event was cancelled. An innocent fundraising event for primary school to build a primary school block for lower primary kids. And so physical organizing is now becoming increasingly difficult, if not impossible, in Kampala. And the second level is organizing online. Now, because of the physical barriers that the state has mounted for people to organize, the population had found space on social media. We want to talk about this stuff online, right? And mobilize online. But what has happened over the last couple of years are consistent attempts to try and limit not just access, but use of social media platforms as a space to organize. So the state has passed what is called the Computer Misuse Act, a law that essentially reintroduces the provision of Section 50 of the Penal Code Act that was declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. That law required people to be sanctioned for spreading what they call false news. Now, they passed the Computer Misuse Act, which is a law that is now being used to restrict organizing online. Several people have been arrested for simply posting critical stuff about the president and the regime in Kampala on social media. You know the case of Stella Nyanzi. Stella Nyanzi has been in jail since November of last year, facing charges for what they call invading the privacy of the president and knowing the person of the president, for simply writing a very colorful poem online. I'm sure many of you have read Stella's writings, quite provocative. The read is just expressing her thoughts using sexual language. Besides Stella, there are many other people who are facing either investigations or prosecution for posting things online. What we are seeing is what is akin to what's happening in Tanzania, where Magufuli just arrests anybody who is critical of him online. So the use of the Computer Misuse Act as a law to restrict online organizing is becoming the new tool for repression in Uganda. You probably have heard about the mobile money tax as well. The stated objective has been that the country needed to raise money, and that by taxing access to and use of social media, the country would raise money. But in fact, it was one of the means employed by the regime in Kampala to stem what they saw as rising use of social media as a space for organizing against the regime. And so they imposed the social media tax. To access social media, I'm sure many of you know, you have to pay a daily tax. And the tax is called over-the-top tax, which is a tax over and above the tax you pay for airtime, for data. So on a daily basis, you have to pay 200 shillings, which is about 5 cents in the US. It sounds like a small amount of money, but for the vast majority of poor people, it's quite a bit of money to pay 200 shillings every day for 24 hours to have access to Facebook, WhatsApp, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, and all of those. The impact has been then that people are therefore either inhibited or unable to organize using social media because it's expensive. You have to pay for it. And so the restriction of online organizing has just become as silly as it is with physical organizing in the country. People are unable to organize properly. We have filed cases to challenge the Public Order Management Act, to challenge the Computer Misuse Act. Those cases are lying idle in the courts. Our attempts to try and get the courts to give us a date to hear the cases have so far not borne any fruit. But so these laws are being used to restrict civic space. The other discussion that I think is important to have is what's happening in the opposition. You've had over the last couple of weeks people calling each other all kinds of names. Pumpkin, pumpkins are yellow on the outside, green on the outside, yellow on the inside. Corn guy is watermelon, green on the outside but yellow on the inside. You had the recent one is the fight between the DP folks. Last night I was listening to a show in which Norbert Mao called somebody, a jukebox, where you insert a coin and they play music. So there's all this happening within the opposition party that I think that represents, in the view of many people, a sense of disorganization, a sense of a lack of purpose, a sense of working at cross purposes, as opposed to focusing on the broader democratic concerns in the country. We're focusing on whether Besigye should be a candidate, whether Mao would be a candidate, whether Bobby Wine would be a candidate. So there's all these apparent negative discussions within the opposition parties, each of them accusing the other of being the agent of the ruling party. What that does is it creates a sense of disorientation, especially in the populace, that there cannot be any good coming from that quarter if the people cannot put their act together. And the NRM is quite adept at using that to their own advantage. They will champion this sort of toxic discussion and use it to say we are unable to these guys are disorganized, they cannot rule the state. The third thing that I think is important to discuss is then what are the possible remedies and spaces in which we have been able to use to push for more respect for rights, more participation of people in the country. We have been able to use litigation. Now, litigation is quite frustrating. As I said, we have several cases that are in court and that have not been heard. We have several people who are released by court on bail and have to report for their bail hearing, report on bail in court for months on end. And so, while we have used the courts, there are limitations that we recognize that exist within the legal system. But there have also been bright moments where individual judicial officers have been extremely helpful in restoring the rule of law, in helping people to get back their rights and freedoms. And so being able to just document, being able to put the court system and all other government systems to test has been one avenue that has been used to be able to push back on what we see as the closing of civic space in Kampala. The other angle is to try and use judicial systems out of the country to be able to put pressure on the regime. And so increasingly we've seen many Ugandans now going to the East African Court of Justice. We have 4 cases pending at the East African Court of Justice. Now, while those cases may not be heard quickly, and even if they are heard, the execution of their decisions might be difficult, but the impact it has on the daily lives of people is that it causes a sense for pause and restraint on the part of state actors. And so the use of institutions outside of Uganda for judicial remedies has become extremely important. We have 2 cases at the African Commission. These cases go as far back as Uganda riot in 2009, seeking remedies for people who were shot and killed on the streets of Kampala for simply demonstrating in support of their king. We have other cases, for example, at the East African Court of Justice, cases against the country's use of criminal defamation as a tool for repression. We've challenged the country's use of criminal defamation laws as being in violation of the African Charter and in violation of the East African Treaty. And so the use of external judicial systems have become extremely important for pushing back on what we see as increasing violations of rights on the continent. The last one that I wanted to share is the question of the youth question, what we see as the youth question. There's a youth bulge in the country. The country is largely youthful. Official government statistics say that 78% of the population is below the age of 35. Now that's in itself an asset for a country, but it can also be a time bomb. And what we see in Kampala or in Uganda now is the important role the young people are playing in the daily lives of the people in our country. The youth are at the forefront of joblessness, the forefront of poverty, unemployment, and all kinds of things. And therefore, they are the ones who are most affected by any form of misrule in the country. And so we've seen increasing focus on the youth in the country. And I think that the youth, the young population offers a chance for turning the page in our country. If the energy that the young people have is properly channeled to productive use, to meaningful engagement in the governance of the country. For many of us who have followed and been working with the different groups like Bobby, we have seen just how the youth feel energized, just how the youth feel a sense of hope in the new voices that I imagine in the country. Now, how we deal with the young people in the country will determine whether the country will be peaceful, whether the country will get back onto the path of rule of law, democracy, good governance. I think that less attention has been focused on organizing young people, but I think the chance to do so presents itself in the new leadership that seems to speak to their interests and speak to their daily needs and demands. So the role of the youth is something we have to examine and see how we can use that space to be able to push back. Now, what do I see as the role of the diaspora in our continued fight for good governance in our country? First of all, I think that the diaspora have to be engaged. You have no option but to be engaged in the daily governance issues of your country. Whether you're from Tanzania, like my friend over here, whether you're from Rwanda, you're from any other African country, you have to be engaged in the issues in your country. You have to keep yourself updated about events in the country and just know what is happening. Because there's no other place you call home. Uganda is the only place. Here, every day you're being reminded you're a foreigner. You're on a permanent residency, you're on a green card, but this is not where you have your roots. Your home is your place. And so I think it's important to be engaged. Being engaged requires that you speak out and speak about the things happening in your country, in the different spaces you find yourself. If you work for a government agency, if you work for a private entity, speak about the problems of our country so that people are aware about what is happening. The second thing that I think is important for us to do is, I think many of us don't invest a lot of time in understanding the different leverages that exist in these spaces to influence events in Uganda. We do a good job of doing a lot of online social media work, but beyond the online social media work, there are lots of things that you can do in these capitals that will put pressure on the regime in your countries to respect human rights, to respect the rule of law. So understanding the power dynamics in these capitals is going to be important. I tell people, for example, that President Museveni is first and foremost a soldier. President Museveni's most important aspect of his governance is the army, and has worked so hard to build military alliances across the world. If you want to get Museveni to sit up and listen, then you have got to understand Museveni's interest with the Department of Defense in the US. Who are the power brokers? Who are the movers in DOD that financed Museveni's multiple excursions on the continent? And how can we use that influence to ensure that we impress upon the regime in Kampala to respect the rule of law, respect human rights? So understanding the power dynamics in these capitals and the people that move things, and then they have understood this very well. Museveni hires extremely sophisticated PR folks here, and lobbyists, who work the corridors of Congress, the corridors of the White House, every single day of the month. But we are not doing an equal assessment and understanding of the power dynamics in people who influence decisions in our country. So it's important to invest your time and energy in understanding the power dynamics and the people that could have could be your allies in the fight against human rights violations. There are many instruments that you can use in the US. Take, for example, the Alien Torts Act. It's a law that is less pronounced here, but a law that allows somebody to sue anyone in the US for human rights violations abroad. Okay? The Alien Torts Act hasn't been used extensively, but it's a law that gives you an opportunity, if you have evidence, to file in court cases against people in the US who are violating rights abroad. I'm sure many of you know about the Global Magnitsky Act, which allows you to. So how can we understand these instruments and deploy them to be able to ensure better governance in our country? I think the diaspora has a role. You live here. You understand and know the people who are here. And being involved in those discussions will be exceedingly important. The last thing is, I think that there is this particular framing of the African continent and countries in these capitals that is misleading, and that we have to understand our role in framing that narrative. Western media would want to frame a particular narrative about the continent. And I'll give you an example. In the 1990s, the Clinton administration came to power praising President Museveni, Paul Kagame, Haile Gabriel Selassie in Ethiopia as the new breed of African leaders. Okay? These were the people who were going to transform the continent. The narrative created was that these were transformational leaders, champions of democracy. In fact, the Time magazine referred to Museveni as the Mandela of the Sub-Saharan Africa. The framing. So the diaspora can be an important constituency in framing the discussion about the continent. There's no doubt about the beauty of our country. There's no doubt about the rich historical heritage that we have. But we are still being defined by Western lenses and Western interest and Western influence. We have not invested in shaping our narratives and being able to define our narratives. And I think that is important. Whether you're in the private sector, whether you're in government, the question of shaping our narrative is important, because it determines how people treat us. And I think that people like my good friend Karim here have done a tremendous job in highlighting the question of human rights concerns in the continent, so that the narrative in the Western media is not just about Museveni, Kagame as an agent of this global power in the fight against terrorism. Yes, it's important to fight terrorism, but I think understanding the cause of terrorism, understanding the drivers of immigration is perhaps a more important objective that we have to go after. So I think you have an important role in shaping that narrative, and in speaking out, in getting involved, in understanding the dynamics in these capitals. You will be able to shape that narrative perhaps more effectively. So I've spoken for far too long. My father told me to learn to shut up, so I'll shut up at this point. And I invite a discussion from you.
In the meantime, we have some pizza in the back, so if it's open, you can go grab a pizza and ask questions. Yes, you can stand up.
Can't take it off. Take it off. Take it, Karim, take it off. Yeah, take it off.
Good afternoon. My brother, welcome. I'm a good friend of TASSC, so I'm very happy to make your acquaintance. I'm sitting next to one of my good friends, and she knows all my bad habits, including the fact that I'm a talkative and I'm argumentative. So I will try and be on good behavior. I have several questions, but I'll ask just a couple and then see how it goes.
Yeah.
And so one that is pretty provocative to me, by the way, my name is Ni Akwete. I'm an immigrant from Ghana. I'm a huge Pan-Africanist. And so I tell everybody I was born in Accra, but I'm an African, okay? The issues of Uganda, South Africa, Egypt are my issues. So that's why I'm here. I want to be polite because I wasn't born in Uganda, so you know more about it than me, but I think what goes on there concerns me, which is why I'm here. The one contrarian view that I wanna push, and I hope that we'll maintain contact, because I've been an activist in Washington for over 40 years. I work on all these issues, but the one that concerns me, maybe because I'm betraying myself with all this gray hair. When I first got to Washington, my hair looked like yours. I think the issue of the youth bulge, we need to handle it carefully. There is no question Africa is a very young continent. We have a lot of young people, they have energy, they want things done. But I think we should be careful about having the youth work at cross purposes with the older generation. It even hurts that I now see myself as the older generation. But what I'm saying is I'm dying. What I want to see is intergenerational cooperation between Africans of every age. I was talking to Leonce yesterday, and one of the things I've been saying is, look, I've spent 40 years as an activist in Washington. I haven't achieved what I want to achieve. I've made a lot of mistakes, but one thing I can guarantee you, I have learned a lot. So I don't want a younger African to also spend 40 years ruining their health, ruining everything to learn what I learned. I'd rather partner with them and say, here are the mistakes I made, here's what I know, take it and use it. So I think cooperation between Africans, the young, and everybody, and I'm saying it should happen here, it should happen in Uganda, it should happen in Ghana, it should happen everywhere. So it bothers me when I hear people say, well, the youth, let's write off the old. Finally, the final point is here. You know, Africa, we are not a writing culture. The West is. And what do Westerners value? They send their children to school. They read books. Our books are old people. So yes, they make a lot of mistakes and all that, but let's not drive a wedge between our youth and our older people, because there are things to learn from each other. So this is the way I would put it. I'm not against the youth. I think the youth are important, but it's a question of handing over the baton.
Yeah.
If the youth don't take the baton from the old, they will make the same mistake the older generation has made. Yeah. And that will be a tragedy for our continent. So my first contrarian point is address the youth divide, that we should be careful how we handle it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nia. And thank you for your question. It's an important question. I wish we could have as much time to nail down on the details. Yeah. Because what I've done is to paint all these issues with a broad brush. But all these issues are issues that we can spend days just discussing the detail. But to respond to you, first, it is important to disagree, by the way. So feel free to disagree if you have to disagree. I think it's healthy. But what I think is the concern for many people in my country is not us against them, but it's the question of being given an opportunity to be a part of shaping the future that you will be. Participation, because what we see, and I keep telling this joke, I have a daughter who will be 4 years in May, and I say, when I was young, I was being told I was the leader for the future. Well, it doesn't seem that future has come. My daughter is being told the same thing. I don't think the leaders of the youth are not just the leaders of the future, but they are part of creating that future and must be involved now. What you see in many of these countries are the youth being excluded or being framed as inexperienced, too young. You are in Muyai. Muyai is a rock, right?
Yes.
You're in Muyai. You're just a ganja smoking individual. You cannot lead. You cannot be a part of this discussion. They view the role of the youth as, you know, when the big guys come, then you must clap, demonstrate, and stuff like that. But I think the question we are asking is not a question of saying the old must go. I think that their wisdom, their history and context is important, but that youth participation must not just be a token. It must be meaningful participation in the governance of their country. And the same would apply to women. I think that in many countries, especially of course in Uganda, women participation is seen as a token given to you by the NRM, for which you must eternally be grateful. That each time you ask for meaningful discussion, it says, be grateful, at least the women now can vote. At least the women now sit in parliament. We have seats for women MPs. But that tokenism has not translated into the actual changes in the lives of the village woman. In so many ways, we are creating the elite group of women who go to office and must be content with being in the office, but not having meaningful role in the lives of the ordinary women. The same thing applies to the young people. That we do not have to have a token seat on the seat of power, on the seat of governance. We must be active and equal participants in shaping the future of the country. And unless that is going to happen, you're going to create a friction. And then you have to look back at people like President Museveni, Paul Kagame, or even in the case of Ghana. Ghana is the home of Pan-Africanism. In the early 60s, Ghana was the rallying place for many Africans, young Africans who fought for independence. Milton Obote and the group, Patrice Lumumba and Tom Boyers. In fact, I was told a very funny story of Zimbabwean Pan-Africanists going to the Pan-Africanist conference in Ghana in the 60s. And they were moving from country to country. When they got to Zaire then, they ran into Lumumba, who says he couldn't go because he had no money. And so they got money and took Lumumba to Ghana. So Ghana is the place. But let's just flash back then. These were young Africans who refused to be ruled by white colonists, who led the movement for independence, for an African identity. People like Museveni in the 80s were young people who were intolerant to what they saw as dictators, and they took up the struggle to go and liberate their countries. I think the question being asked is the same question that the Lumumbas, the Kwame Nkrumahs, the Abdul Nassers asked in the 60s, or the same question that the Musevenis asked in the 80s. Participation in their governments. They want a government that works for the people. They want a government that listens meaningfully to the people. And youth participation cannot just be a token that is given because it's fashionable, like we have done to what we are calling women's emancipation, meaningful participation. And I think that that is what we have to do. We must not take the youth simply as people you can deploy on a demonstration, right? So I think that the question would be wrong if it is framed as an intergenerational fight. The old must go, and the young must take over. No, I think that it's a question of meaningful participation in space.
My name is Dr. Kauma, and I had a quick question, mostly from the perspective of our institutions in the country, especially as you try to work within the structures that we have in our country. Because that's the challenge we have in the diaspora, is that sometimes we are accused of trying to seek foreign intervention in the matters going on in our country. And so my question is, and it's the same debate I've had with many of my friends who have said that we need to be patient and evolve. I think that's the argument which some people make, is that the young people or the opposition are impatient, that they think Uganda can be at the level of the Western democracies now, yet the Western democracy took 200 years, 300 years. That's the argument some people have made. But from my perspective, when you look even within the internal structures of the ruling government, you see like there's no even free exchange of ideas where you have sole candidacy within the party. So are we actually evolving, or are we just allowing dictatorship to prevail in our country? And for me, my question is particularly on the institutions. Let's say the time comes and Museveni leaves. Where do you see the state of the country? Do we have institutions that can hold our country together? If you look at the judiciary, if you look at the legislative branch, if you look at even the media, the fourth estate, do we have the structures within the country? In other words, have we evolved? Because that's the argument some people are making, that we should be patient, that we can have the same leader, but let's allow our politics to mature. So is that actually possible? And as someone who works within the judiciary, how bad is it within the system to the point that you have people locked away at the sites you talked about, and then you have the judiciary? What role is the judiciary actually playing in present-day Uganda? So I don't know if my question is a bit clear. The evolution aspect of it, and let's say Museveni is gone, will those institutions survive? Will they stick together to hold our country together? So thank you so much.
Daktari, thank you for your questions. I think that it's a two-part question. I'll try to answer it if I can. In all aspects of our lives in the country, whether it is in the governance of our country, in civil society, there has been a tendency of building a cult structure, powerful men, oftentimes less women, but powerful men and powerful individuals, so that you see an NGO as being unable to survive beyond its founder, because the founder is the big guy there. You see a political party built around an individual, a powerful individual, whether it being the ruling party or any other groups. So there's the whole question about the death of institutions, the inability of institutions to be able to be what it is intended to be. So much so that you have heads of institutions behaving and thinking that they owe their office to the magnanimity of the president. They owe their office and jobs to the whim and mercy of the leadership, right? And so you have people constantly living in fear and trying all they can to appease the powers that be. That is all a function of the politics, in the way that I understand it. That's all a function of the politics. The concentration of power in the hands of not just an individual, but a few individuals is what is killing institutions in the country. Betty Kamia made the argument, although she has now flipped completely, turned around, made the argument about the power that we've given to the presidency in law in our country, for example. The president appoints almost every head of public institution, from a director to a commissioner, to a minister, to a permanent secretary. He could spend his entire year appointing at least 5 people every day of the year, and it wouldn't still be complete. The power that we have given to an individual or an institution in the presidency is just enormous. And as such, that power is being used to perpetuate the hold of power by that individual. So I think that unless we fix the distribution of power, institutions will never be strong. Because then the powerful will seek to undermine those institutions for their own ends. It's the same thing in Uganda, that you have. I've had discussions with some judges, especially the female judges, who ask the question, how dare you criticize the president? How dare you say that against the president? This is a judge speaking about a case before her. In the case of Stella Nyanzi, there were female judges I spoke to who told me, how can she say that about the president? How? He's the fountain of honor, he's the head of state. So people who look at a cult figure and try and play to his whims, his interest, perceived or real. And that has the impact of undermining institutions in the country. So and I can't say any better than what Obama said to the African Union when he addressed them in Ethiopia. The point about building strong institutions and not strong men. But to be able to do that, you have to devolve power and make these institutions actually work. So that when I'm a judge deciding a case, what bears on my mind is the law and not the repercussions of my decisions from the powers that be. Will I be transferred to quote-unquote a dry area in Karamoja, to be a judge in Karamoja, because I've given a decision against the powers that be? So what should weigh in my mind is not being punished for doing the right thing. I don't think we are there yet, but I think that that's where we need to start. In terms of the judiciary, what is the role of the judiciary? The judiciary has its own weaknesses. The judiciary is deprived of resources. It is the only other branch of government that is not fully staffed. Because the executive has all ministers appointed, everybody appointed. You have Parliament has everybody in place. In fact, if a seat fell vacant, the law requires 6 months to hold elections. The judiciary is the only other branch of government that is not properly manned. You have vacancies in the judiciary, and this is deliberate. They don't want a strong, vibrant, independent judiciary. The law requires that there should be 120 judges in the country. We don't have 120 judges in the country, and as such, we have few judges who have to deal with hundreds of cases every day. It's deliberate to make them weak. The judiciary has to beg for money from the executive. Parliament can appropriate their own resources, they can determine their own salaries, so does the executive. But the judiciary does not have financial independence. So because of those weaknesses, the courts are not functioning properly. We must state that first and foremost. The court has to beg the Minister of Justice for them to be able to have their budget approved. So you can imagine that kind of judiciary. So technically, the judiciary is crippled, is weak, it's unable to do what it's supposed to do because it is just weak, it has no resources. But that notwithstanding, there have been numerous occasions where individual judicial officers have stood their ground and have been able to be the bastion for hope, the last place for hope where you can go. You know that once you are locked up in jail, the only person who can release is a court order. So there have been judges, judicial officers who have been very, very courageous in seeking to uphold the rule of law and make sure that at least we can do the very best that we can. And I'll give you an example. In the case of Robert Chagodani and the Arua suspects, it is unheard of to be charged with a serious offense as treason. It's a capital offense. And in just under 1 week come out on bail. I have not in my 15 years of legal practice come across any such case really, where you're charged with treason, capital offense, the sentence of which is death. And in 1 week, a judge has the courage to say, you have a right to bail, you've met the conditions for bail, get out. That's an example of a courageous judicial officer upholding the law. Even when we went to court, the state prosecutors were arguing that the suspects must deposit their passports. They had a long list of restrictions they were asking. The court said, I'm not concerned about their movement, they're not flight risks. And so you have cases where individual judicial officers have been extremely courageous in doing what they should do. Now, our task as lawyers is to put those institutions to test. Okay? And we take every chance to put every government institution to test. Show us that you can work. Show us you can do what is supposed to be done. We will have no excuse to to criticize them and say things we say about them if we didn't give them the chance to do that which is right. And so take every opportunity to try and put those institutions to test in ways that perhaps they never imagined. And so litigate as many cases as possible. Let a judicial officer embarrass himself or herself by a funny, what the Speaker of Parliament called a stupid decision, or have the chance to acquit themselves with distinction. So we've had those situations where we put those institutions to test. And it's not just the judiciary, all other government institutions, is put them to test. And as far as they have limitations, they are still weak, I think we must put them to the test and make sure that they work. And you'll be surprised, there are many people within the civil service that mean so well and can go the extra mile in spite of the risks that they face. The risk of being persecuted, of being dismissed, of being transferred to a remote area as a punishment. They go the distance in ensuring that at least the right thing is done. If we didn't have those people in the civil service, I wouldn't be doing what I do in Kampala. I do so because there are people in those places that would write to you to give you information about what is happening, that would uphold the law in decisions they take in their own spaces. So yes, we are weak. We need to liberate our institutions from the influence of politics. But as we do that, we must recognize that there are people in the service of the state who are good, patriotic, and well-meaning countrymen and women. So you want to follow up?
Just a quick question. You talked about testing the system, and I apologize for taking a few moments. With that said, do you see the possibility of Uganda ever having a power transition through the current system we have, even if the opposition had the numbers, based on your experience and how you see the institutions, the riots, the corruption, the impunity? Is it possible? Because I think those are the two paradigms you have in the opposition right now. There's the defiance angle, where they say, don't waste your time getting Dagamuntu and that kind of thing. It's a waste of your time. And then you have the other angle which says, let's get engaged. So when you look at those two paradigms, which will be the right course of action from your perspective? So I don't know if that's a fair question to ask you.
You're dragging me into politics.
Yeah, just to get your opinion, because I think this is more of an institutional question. Just to follow up to my question about institutions. I think if you look at it from the angle of the institutions, can they actually sustain a fair election or close to an election where someone can win and the incumbent steps away? Is that a possibility with our legal structures? Because we have had these issues before court, after elections, where the court makes a ruling that there was actually malpractice that happened, but they cannot make that decision to annul the election the same way we saw our neighbors do it next door. So can Uganda's institutions be able to make such a decision under the current state? Again, sorry for taking up your time, but just a follow-up. Thank you.
Let me walk a very tight rope here, but avoid getting involved in the political undertones and say this. You must recognize that what is happening in Uganda is not ordinary. To think that we will go and vote, we will go to court and Museveni will hand over power, that is to be too kind to what's happening in Uganda. What's happening in Uganda is extraordinary. It is not ordinary times where you think that former elections will be the means to solve our problems. Because time and again you have seen that elections have been manipulated, that systems have been manipulated. So I don't think what's happening in Uganda is ordinary, and to approach it with an ordinary solution would be to miss the point. The second point that I want to make, as vague as that is to say the point that has to be made is that there is no sign of those in power willing to lose power, which is natural. I mean, people want to maintain power. What is disappointing is the way and means they have taken to retain power. Is the distance they can go to retain power. And that would mean that, people are willing to kill to stay in power. People are willing to beat up MPs to remove a barrier, which is an age limit in the Constitution. People are willing to bribe MPs to remove term limits. They can go the distance to charge their opponents with rape, with treason, with all manners of accusations to inhibit their active participation in an election process. And so they will break into a lawyer's office to steal documents so that you don't go and argue a good case in court. So they can go the distance in doing whatever they want to do to retain power. It is the means by which they've gone about it that makes it extremely difficult for those ordinary conventional means of power transfer and power sharing to be feasible in Uganda. So there's no one means that can be deployed to ensure peaceful transfer of power. And every other option has to be explored. Those who believe in overwhelming the system must try their best in overwhelming the system. Those who believe that you must get involved in peaceful civil disobedience, I think that the time to deploy every means for that to happen is now. I think it's possible. The only thing that I see as a panacea for the problems of our country is really in the people. As long as the people realize that the predicaments of their lives, whether it being no food, famine, hunger, bad roads, whether it being hospitals without medicine, that these things are linked to the way public resources is shared. That these things are linked in which the governance infrastructure is set up. And people begin to get involved in public life, in politics, in governance, we will never have change in our country. And I'll give you an example, what I think as the betrayal of our country by a large section of our middle class. Look at statistics during election. Museveni is ruling the country. Let's say he got the votes he said he got by a majority vote of a minority. Over 56% of the population just didn't vote. Sense of despair. either because they didn't have national IDs, but they just didn't participate in the election. They allowed their destiny to be determined by the minority. So getting the majority that stays away from the ballot, stays away from discussing politics, would be an important first step to ensuring that we hold our leaders to account. In places where that happens, the leaders tend to listen. And I think that for me, it is difficult to steal an election if the majority, if the margin of loss is so big. If we all turned out to vote, you can steal if it is a million votes. But if the difference is 4 million, 5 million, it's very difficult to steal it. And so getting out and getting engaged and getting involved, I think for me is important. And unless the people begin to relate what's happening to them, to the governance of the country, we'll still have people in power manipulating the population. Even the middle class, and I tell people, I told my friends, that you can get a medical emergency in your nice bungalow with perhaps the most sophisticated equipment in your house, cameras, dogs, guards, but you still have to go to the hospital. There might even be a good hospital nearby, but if the roads have potholes, if the roads are narrow because the Minister for Works has stolen the money to build the road, you might die on your way to the hospital. You will die. So unless we begin to realize that unless all of us are safe, unless our public life is governed properly, where everybody is equal before the law, if you work hard, you have a chance at life, nobody is going to be safe. And I think that President Museveni will still continue to stay in power because he doesn't want to go, he wants to stay in power. Unless you make it risky for someone to hang on to power, they will continue to hang on to power. So we must, in my view, we must engage at all levels and make the connection about our daily lives and the way our country is governed. Yes, sir.
I have a 5-second question.
Yeah.
It says, why does Museveni want to power and why does one doesn't want Museveni to have power? And what is your comment about Venezuela? Venezuela giving food for oil. Thank you. I can repeat the first one.
And I've got it. Okay. I'm just trying to, like the elder, try to be polite in my response. I'm trying to just channel my good manners to that answer. So first, I don't want to comment about Venezuela. I think that it's too far away. I have no idea about the context and what's happening. But what I know is, it will be a mistake for you to think that the US deploying troops in Central African Republic to pursue the LRA is because they love Ugandans so much. No. They have their own interests. And they have their own problems. They cannot be the solution to your problem. I think that is very clear. People must understand.
Yeah.
Don't look to anybody else for your, you have the solution. So giving food aid, giving military aid, it's not because they love you. They have an interest they want to protect. So realize that that interest is inherent in what they do. And that the solution to your problem lies not with them, but with you. And then you must understand your identity, understand your interest. If you don't, then you get lost in life. I think that the question is not about Museveni as an individual. I mean, I don't have a problem. I don't know him. But I think that the things that have happened under his rule are the things that make us begin to ask for better. I don't know if you know about Uganda, but it's a country that has...
I'm from Tanzania.
Yeah.
So, I was born there. I was born in 1975. Fought for
just before your country invaded ours to overthrow me, right?
Yeah.
But here's the point.
Yeah.
But here's the point. Here's the point. If you live in a country in which a ruling party hencho or a big man can go and grab your land and you have no recourse. If you live in a country in which, for merely demonstrating against the regime, you're shot and killed. Shot, broad daylight, and killed. If you live in a country in which women have to die for giving life because there's no proper care in the hospital. If you live in a country in which the government troops can descend upon the palace of the king because of an apparent disagreement and shoot and kill in broad daylight 158 people, you will begin to ask for better. So I think that it is not about the individual person, but about what his governance has been, and that people want better. From where I stand, without necessarily getting involved in politics, we imagine that our country can be better.
He asked you, can it be better?
Yeah, so our country can be better. I think that it can be better if it is governed properly.
But this guy asked you, can it be better? Same question.
Yeah.
You're going.
Yeah,
Sorry,
we
like,
did.
you know, we may be in a vicious cycle if you have not developed it seriously.
Okay,
Because we are the one, I think we are the one responsible to.
Let me hear from my sister.
Mr. Opiyo, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. And also, first of all, before I ask my question, I wanted to say thank you for the comments that you made about Ugandan women not just being tokens in any opposition movement, but being active participants. So thank you for saying that.
I'm a feminist.
Wonderful. My second question is, could you tell us a little bit about the situation in northern Uganda in Apa? Could you tell us what is happening, what is going on, what we as Ugandans in the diaspora can do? And thank you also for talking about investing in power dynamics and also figuring out how to leverage our power here. Thank you.
So Apa is personal to me because my great-grandfather was a chief of that area. And a big part of our clan claims ownership of a large swath of Apa. The Pawel people claim ownership of that area, extending up to the Nile. My stepmother was from Pakele. Pakele is in Ajumani, which is the district neighboring Apa. And so it's very personal to me. I have relatives, I have friends who live there, who have been killed. My father himself is involved in that conflict. But here's what's happening in Apa. And perhaps Apa is more pronounced because there's been a lot of killing. Government troops have not just killed people in Apa. They have destroyed homesteads, they have burnt houses, they have raped women, they have cleared crops. All this going on without any media coverage because the area is so remote and nobody is reporting it. In an attempt to try and evict an entire population from their natural homestead, give away that property to an investor, somebody who wants to build a sugar factory. But that is just a symptom of the problem. The bigger problem happening in the country is the fight for land. The attempt by business interests and the political elite to gain ownership of productive land in the country. It's happening in Apa, it's happening in Lamuo, it's happening in all the government ranches that used to be in the country. If you go to ranches in western Uganda, go to ranches in northern Uganda, the Aswa Ranch, for example. Those properties are being appropriated by people with government connections that they want to use it for commercial agriculture. So what is happening is the struggle for land as a resource in the country. And you can see that by the attempts to amend the land law in the country. The land question has been, and I think it's going to be the next source of conflict in our country. Really full-blown war if we don't deal with the question properly. The grabbing of land. So the bigger question is grabbing of land. And what's happening in Apa is just the grabbing of land. Powerful business interests connected to the state simply wants to take advantage of the powers they have to grab property. In Apa, what is happening is that the person interested in that property is the Madevani family. They were given the property to grow sugarcane. Sorry? They're Indians of Uganda descent. Yes. So they want to grow sugarcane. They were the same people who were involved in the Mabira riots. Part of the Mabira forest was being given away to the Meta family to grow sugarcane. And so what's happening in Apa is a representation of the bigger land question in the country. In Uganda, you have the same problems happening. It's the grabbing of land. People just come and grab land because they want to use it for many things. Those of you who grew up in Kampala perhaps know about the Naguru Nakawa estate, which was an estate in the city for middle-income people, largely poor people from the north to west who used to work in Kampala. Over 400 families were evicted in one night, quote unquote, to establish a satellite city. It's been nearly 7 years. Not a single brick has been built in that space. Because the people who are supposed to build it sold the land on to somebody else, and now a conflict has emerged. The guys who sold it didn't have money. So the question of land is what is happening in Apa and what's happening across the country. The killings, the eviction of families, the manipulation by elected leaders is just a secondary problem. The problem, that's the means that's being used. But the initial problem is the land, which is you just want to grab people's land and give it away to other people. The argument being advanced is that many people own land but are not using it, so they want to put the land to productive use. And Apa is a very, very sad story. I have been to Apa several times. And you would think that government troops would perhaps be, because people are being displaced in IDP camps. We used to know about IDP camps because of the LRA. The second phase of IDP, people being displaced into internally displaced people's camps, is a government initiated terror, displacing people into camps. I have seen them going as far as digging up graves. You know. An old woman was told to come and take away her grave, and all she had was a few bones of her child she had buried. Dug up and told, leave. I've seen people who have been shot by government troops. So what we are doing in the case of Apa, there have been several attempts to try and go to court. My good friend and the former president of the Law Society, Francis Gimara, has filed a case in Apa for human rights violations. We have worked with NGOs and groups such as Action Aid to try and provide much needed humanitarian intervention for the people in Apa. We have worked with Amnesty International to try and raise the concern. I think that the people in the diaspora can help us in the case of Apa. First, again, just let the world know what President Museveni's army, police, and game warders are doing to poor, traumatized post-war communities in the Apa region. We are not talking about people who are established, these are people who have just returned from IDP camps after 20 years of a conflict between government of Uganda and the LRA. That poor populations are being victimized by their own state. Let the world know about what is happening. Some of the pictures that I have here on my laptop, if I share them with you, they're really traumatizing. So let the world know what's happening in Apa. Secondly, let the world know about what I see as the power of multinationals and their influence in sub-Saharan Africa. You have foreign governments sending their business interests in companies to go and grab large swaths of land. We have a case going on at the East African Court of Justice against the government of Tanzania, where a Maasai population in a place called Lolondo is being evicted to give away that property to a Saudi investor to establish a hunting ground. The population have gone through years of abuse similar to Apa. And so these multinationals must be held to account. Who are the people, the interests behind the Madivani companies? They may be on the London Stock Exchange or New York Stock Exchange. Get their investors, let them know the impact of what they're doing in these communities. And invite them to either desist from investing in those companies or from at least doing so rightly, allowing community participation, community ownership, and respecting cultural heritage of the population. So I think that you can do that. The last one is, again, just let the foreign media, the foreign press. I have understood that a report in the New York Times tends to evokes a lot of public attention in the Washington Post. Write about it, let them know, let them report about these things, because their own companies. There was a Dutch company that was financing a flower farm in Kampala, a flower farm in which women were being asked to work in the farms without protective gear. And you had cases of people having their nails falling off because of exposure to toxic chemicals in the flower farm. What the activists in Uganda did was to highlight that concern. Of course, they faced a lot of flack. But eventually what happened is that the people in Netherlands began to ask the questions. Are we using our resources to invest responsibly? So at least let people know what's happening, identify these companies, and ensure that they understand the impact of their work. If you can support local activists who are working on these issues, do so. In the case of Zoka Forest is a large forest in northwestern Uganda. Zoka Forest is a natural forest, but government soldiers have been deployed in there by private interests, and they're cutting down trees. And no one knows about it. The activists who have tried to protest the destruction of the forest have been arrested, have been beaten. So highlight this concern. Some of these trees cut find their ways in your capitals here for making beautiful houses such as this. It's a long answer, but I hope I have responded. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Opiyo, for that motivation, answer you're giving us. I have a question about you earlier said about the judicial electing judges, and the way I wanted to get your opinion on like most court cases, especially dealing with the oppositions, like they never get court dates or something like that. During the human rights work and the torture victims, all those perpetrators, what are you doing to get them to book, and how are they? Do you share the opinion that generally in Uganda, most political cases never get court dates? Even this treason case will drag for years and years like we've seen in the past? I think that's my question, thank you.
You have to understand the purpose of these cases against leading opposition leaders. It is never intended to be prosecuted. It is not a case filed in court to be able to call witnesses, get a hearing, get a conviction or an acquittal. The sole purpose is to inconvenience you, to keep reporting to a court case for years and take away your attention from the activism that you're involved in. That's the primary intention. Little wonder these cases never get prosecuted. In fact, eventually they get dismissed after several years in court. I have lost count of how many cases Colonel Dr. Kiza Besigye is attending to across the country. Just last week he was in, I think, Lokunjiri, attending to a case that was filed in 2017 for organizing a rally to oppose lifting of the age limit. And so these cases are never intended to be prosecuted. They're meant to inconvenience you. I have no doubt in my mind that even the cases against the Arua folks will eventually die away, will never be prosecuted. I have had a chance to look at that file. like in all those files, there's no evidence. There is absolutely nothing to be used in a court of law to prosecute that case. So I don't think that those cases are cases intended to be heard and prosecuted. The second thing is that, and you have to understand the role of the country's investigative and prosecutorial arm of the state. What is the role of the DPP in all of this? What's the role of the CID in all of this? The way that prosecutions of these cases have been done in the past suggests very strongly that the office of the DPP is being used for a political purpose as opposed to a criminal purpose, to just prosecute crimes, at least in most of these cases. Because take, for example, the case of treason. The law requires that the cases be sanctioned personally by the DPP. And you would presuppose that in sanctioning a case to be taken to court, you would have been convinced of a prima facie case. That there is at least a plausible case to present to court. But in many of these cases, the files are sanctioned without evidence, pointing to the complicity of the Director of Public Prosecution or the office of the DPP in using his office to pursue political opponents. The police will arrest and investigate these cases and take it to court even if they have no evidence. And so I think you must examine at two levels the role of the DPP as a directorate, not Max Bit as a person, or the use of the CID or the investigative arm of the police in using their office as an instrument for repression. And there have been so many individuals who have unfortunately had to face this justice system. The inability or the lack of judges in and of itself is not the reason these cases take too long in court. In any case, at the very slightest opportunity, the courts have been able to dismiss many of these cases for lack of prosecution. So I don't think that the problems of the judiciary notwithstanding, the cases take long to be heard. But in particular cases of the political opposition, it is beyond the courts. You have to look to the prosecutorial office. The guy who, for example, prosecuted basically for rape became a judge subsequently. He's now the chair of the Electoral Commission. Justice Gamukama, he was the deputy DPP at the time. You have to question why those individuals use their offices to prosecute cases that the courts, in that case of rape, the court was very harsh in its condemnation of the DPP's office, saying the case was primarily baseless. It was the imagination of the prosecutors, cooked by the DPP, prepared somewhere in State House and brought to the court prosecution. So yes, the courts have their problems, but in this particular case, you have to look beyond the courts. Of course, you can argue that the courts can exercise judicial activism to say, from the very instance, dismiss the case upon arrival. But technically, it is more complicated than that. You have to, due process and fair hearing requires you must hear, or at least give a chance for the parties to present their case. But yeah, these are all cases, in my view. I've been involved in it from the very beginning. I was one of the very few people who saw Bobby or Zake when they were first sighted. And you cried when you saw them because they were badly beaten. So you would think the court would say, in light of the evidence of torture, we will not prosecute these cases. But those cases are in court. The court's hands are tied, but the DPP continues to prosecute these cases and bring new charges against them. Just yesterday, on Friday, in Uganda, Zake was appearing in Arua to answer for a case of escape from lawful custody. Somebody who was arrested, beaten to pulp and left unconscious and dumped at a hospital. He's being accused of escaping in that state from police custody. And so the cases are just meant to intimidate those people. But secondly, and more importantly, send a message to the other people that if they can do this to Zake, to Bobby, because what they did was, they didn't have to do it. They would have arrested these guys and taken them to whatever they want to take them. But you arrest somebody and beat them to pulp and humiliate them, it sends a very strong message that this can happen to you if you dare challenge the regime in the way that they have challenged. If you dare to organize. And so they are nipping in the bud leaders to send an example to the other people, young people who might be interested. And they've begun to do that with the diaspora. I mean, a couple of people were arrested at the Tebe airport for things they had posted on Facebook. When they were in Boston or in California, you show up. The NRM party has said, we will look for you. We will get you. They simply just want to scare you from doing what you're doing here with the diaspora. When you go home for your holidays, you will come to you. It's just to scare you. So yeah, I don't think the problem is the court. The problems lie further afield. You have a question?
Yes, one more chance.
Go ahead, sir.
Let me. Of course, I'm regretting the way I approached my first comment because you and I really, really agree over so many things. It's the same things that I've learned. But I did highlight, I didn't mean nobody should be excluded well, because they are too young. And in my case, I say I shouldn't be excluded because I'm too old, at least in activism, because I used to do a lot of sports. I can't do that anymore. I can barely walk. So those things that I cannot do, I've excluded myself. But when it comes to activism, reading, thinking, knowing what is going on here, I have a lot to give. So I'm saying, don't exclude me because of my actually, if we are a partnership, we'll do a great job. I will tell, since this room is full of my brothers and sisters from Uganda, let me tell you one quick anecdote. As you know, Mr. Obama brought all the African leaders, most of them here anyway, in 2014. 3 days before that, me and a Ugandan and a Rwandan, we held a press conference because people were saying, why didn't he should have brought Mr. Mugabe. And we held a press conference. And I actually said, my problem is not that he excluded Mr. Mugabe, we can debate that. My problem is that he didn't exclude more dictators. So when they got here, there was a reception in the Senate, and I have friends in Congress, so I got one of the tickets. And there was this room with all these African leaders. And one American friend saw me and said, what are you doing here? And I said to her, I'm an African. There are African leaders here, and you, an American woman, are asking me why I'm here? Why are you here? And she said to me, well, because I thought you would be outside demonstrating, because you held that press conference against this meeting. And I said, well, you know what? I both demonstrate outside and I lobby inside. And then later I saw her talking to President Museveni, because she's a good friend of President Museveni. And something in me clicked. And I said, okay, I want to annoy her some more. So I went to her and said, please introduce me to the president. And she turned around and hissed at me. She said, no, because you don't behave yourself. I said, what have I done? I haven't done anything. He's the president. I'm sure he has bodyguards. So she turns around and says to she said, And then she says to the president, Mr. President, let me introduce Ni Akwete. He's brilliant, but he's a troublemaker. And I said, what trouble did I make? She says, and you know, President Museveni was staring at me all the time because the lady is short, so the president was staring at me while I was talking to the lady, and she says, yeah, you said this this summit should not be held. And I said, no, what I said is, dictators should not have been invited because I'm African and I think dictators are bad for our development. And President Museveni, the only thing he says to me was, where are you from? And I said, Ghana. And he goes, and he walks away. And I actually said, okay, I admire him because he wasn't going to waste his time over an issue like this. But my point is, so look, I'm on the same side with you. That's why what I said about the young people, and I'm not against young people. I actually want young people I can work with. I'm just saying, here is what I learned, use it. Now, on the diaspora, Andrea is here. I have spent all this time, I'm from Ghana, I'm here. I think it is a mistake for us to focus only on our countries. Listen, we love our countries. If there was a problem in Ghana, I'll be the first because my umbilical cord is buried there. But I think when we are here, there is strength in numbers. So what I've been trying to do for 30 years, whether it's Somalia or South Africa or Egypt or Mali or Nigeria, I'm the first. Because what I would like is for, in this room, I would like all the Africans in the Washington area to come. And if it's a Uganda issue, we say to the US government, you have to deal with all of us, okay? Because I can bet you in any Ugandan village, and I've never been to Uganda, but any Ugandan village, when there is a death, it's not just the family in which there's a death. When there's a birth, it's not just the family with the birth. We pull together. And here in America, I think our secret weapon will be if we pull together. If we say we, all the Africans, we are concerned about what President Museveni is doing. We are concerned about what President Kagame is doing. We are concerned about what President Sisi in Egypt is doing. And I pick those three. I'm always telling Andrea. Yes, because Eritrea is thawing out a little bit. Yeah. But I say because even if you are not a citizen here, you pay taxes. So when the US soldiers are hunting Mr. Museveni's enemies, they are using your money, even if you are not a citizen. If you are a citizen, they are using your power. And so yesterday, I sent this note to a number of people, including Leons, to say, I've just heard that the speaker in Kampala may be in a coma. And so I'm sending it to all my American friends and saying, you need to look into this. Because if this has anything to do with the government abusing her, they are using your money. They are using your power, okay? And they are doing it against the name of the United States. So I agree, the diaspora, we have to work together, but I'm saying, please, let's work together as Africans, okay? Because if you work as just Ugandans, it's very easy to ignore you. 3 months ago, the hot issue was Cameroon. Cameroon has a civil war. Okay, people are being tortured, they are being killed. The Cameroonians will come and see me and we'll talk. Sudan, the same thing. They will come and see me and we talk. And I'm saying, look, okay, yes, I'll come. But you must come when there is an issue of every African country. Because that's where our strength lies. So anyway, I'm so glad you are doing this. You should. Those of us, the Africans who are here, we are the lucky ones. So we owe our people back home. Life here is not easy, but it is 20 times more difficult if you were back home. And finally, I put pressure on the US government because I'm saying, look, there will be courageous people like my brother here, like Bobby and others. But so long as the US is supporting bad African leaders, those people will be killed. So my argument to the US is, remove your power from the bad African leaders. Then it will be a struggle between a bad leader and his people. But if there is a bad African leader and his people are challenging him, my brother has talked about how important the people are, but he's also mentioned how people have been killed. There's a reason we are doing this here. This is an organization that deals with people who've been tortured. I've met some of them, and it humbles me. But there will be more torture if they are doing it with American support. And the media is painting a bad picture of who is a good African leader and who's a bad one. I don't want to go on too much, but I have a lot of time. I've gone through this. You are doing the right thing. You have to support the people back home, but it starts with putting pressure on the authorities here and their people and telling them, no, you shouldn't be supporting bad leaders. It's not even in your interest. It doesn't accord with your values, and it's certainly not in your interest. My brother, before you leave, I would like for us to exchange contacts, so we can share notes. There's a lot that needs to be done. There's a lot we must do. But thank you again.
Let me take a chance at guessing the short lady you had interaction with.
Yes. Yes.
Zandaya Fraser.
No.
Yeah.
And it's funny that these days, of course, I'm missing. No, I know Jendai well, and I have issues with her, especially on Ethiopia.
Yeah.
But the Ugandan, on Uganda, the lady I'm talking about is, and she's even married to a Ghanaian, so how come I can't, her name is slipping my mind.
That's okay.
Rosa Whittaker.
Yeah, Rosa Whittaker.
Yeah. Who's very good friends with President Museveni.
They're not just friends, they're business partners.
Okay.
Yeah.
And she's also good friends with my president now in Ghana, President Akufo-Addo. So she makes friends with a lot of African leaders.
Yeah.
I know we have common friends, but my point is, you should not support dictatorial leaders who are abusing their people. For me, that is inexcusable.
If I may, and
yes.
this, from my experience, this is what has happened.
Yes.
That the people in these capitals have no idea about what their governments could be doing with their taxpayers' money abroad. And so what we have been trying to do is to highlight the concerns to the taxpayers in these capitals. It's good to work the corridors of Congress, but it's also good to let the American people know that their taxpayers' money is being used for this purpose in Uganda. And to just give you two examples, in the case that for Bobby, for example, we deployed a couple of cameramen on the streets of Kampala in the process after the Yarua arrest, because there were demonstrations and they were exchanging the streets. We were able to capture on camera American weapons being used to shoot unarmed civilians on the streets of Kampala. And brought that here to the American people and said, look, is this what you want your taxpayers' money to be doing? The broader, wider American interest is not to use taxpayers' money to not just prop up a dictator, but to use it to kill innocent civilians on the street. And so we are in agreement in as far as that is concerned. But to go back to the initial point, which appears to be a point of departure, I think it was not in response to what you have said, that the young people must not disregard the old. It is rather a representation of the statements by the old in power on the continent. To say that the young people are useless and must not be given a chance. So I think that the question that I was trying to raise is not that you're suggesting that all people must, but rather that the argument that, say for example, President Museveni has used against Bobby in Kampala, the young man, is inexperienced, he knows nothing. Or the example that, and this is the example that I use, a good friend of mine was contesting for elections to be an MP. He was a guild president, he had just come out of the university and he was contesting elections. And his opponent, who was the leader of opposition in parliament, who had lost his seat the election before, was trying to come back in this election. And his response to him was, "You're a very young man, you're unable to become an MP."
Really?
And the young boy had a fantastic comeback And he said, it is true, compared to this old man, I'm much younger in age, but we all qualified to be MPs. But he said something more shocking. He said, if I were a lady, he would be asking me out. He wouldn't be saying I'm too young. And this was because this very same professor was involved in an accident with his girlfriend, who was a 23-year-old campus student. If I were a lady, he would be asking me out. And then if this is said in the local language, it's very deep, right? Yeah, it's extremely deep and hearty. So the point being that, participation is not for the purpose of exclusion, but for the purposes of bringing together everybody involved in a meaningful, not a token way that I think we are seeing on the continent. In respect to the question about being involved in the diaspora, about the African continent, I couldn't agree more. Part of the reason I'm in DC was to try and get a senator or a congressman or congresswoman to go to San Francisco on the 30th of this month to address a rally by Sudanese activists against the government of al-Bashir. And so bringing together the African forces in the diaspora will give you numbers, yes, it's important that you must do that. But I also think that the solidarity, I think in my view, must focus on the hotspots as well.
Oh yeah, no question.
Because then you run the risk of becoming like an ignorant American college student. You think Africa is one continent, right? I teach too many of them who have no idea about Tanzania, about Uganda, about Ghana, or about Mauritania, about Malaysia. Yeah. So we don't have to package Africa in the narrative that ignorant American elites think Africa is one composite entity. But to say, look, there is diversity, there is so many problems. Cameroon may not have
challenges.
Sorry?
People say problems with challenges.
Yeah.
Some people wouldn't say problems, they say challenges.
But yeah, I think that we must act in solidarity with others across the continent.
Yes.
The killing of people in Anglophone Cameroon, this is gone unmentioned.
Yes.
Nobody talks about it. Nobody speaks about it. I think we must raise these concerns and focus on the hotspots, but also use our numbers. If we agree that we focus on hotspots, then you focus on it as a group and negotiate.
Absolutely, and just to liven things, and my boss and my friend is here, so I better be careful. But I'm looking at, we live in Washington. This country is very powerful, okay? But at the same time, we have to be clear-eyed and look at how they think and how they do things. As much as we love Africa, okay, I was trained, you need to understand who you are dealing with. See things very clearly, whether it's a fact you like or don't like. Everywhere you look, in the Congress, in the administration, you can see that for them, Africa is the least of their priorities. Yeah. So that the State Department, the Africa Bureau, gets the smallest budget, okay? Ambitious diplomats don't want to be assigned to the continent. And when you really push, in fact, the other thing I did yesterday, besides Uganda, I sent out something on Uganda, I sent out another thing on Mozambique. Because AFRICOM, they say, well, we are thinking about whether we should send relief to Mozambique. And I'm saying, why? Why are you thinking about it? You should be doing it right away. Okay, so this is the thing. But my point is, so because they put Africa so low on their agenda, we have to work on that. Which is why I agree with you. We pick a few countries, but for that, I'm even willing to live with their ignorance that says Africa is a country. Okay, so they are dealing with Africa. So for them, South Africa, Nigeria, Egypt, okay? Those are the big countries. So I attend everything on Nigeria, and this is my joke. There is a good friend in Voice of America, he's Nigerian. He will see me and says, "Nee, I'm gonna tell the Ghanaians your secret." I said, "What is my secret?" He said, I'm going to tell them you love Nigeria more than you love Ghana because you are always at the Nigerian thing. So I'm saying I agree with you, but because their attention span is so short, they just want to talk about Nigeria, okay? If Museveni is here, they will talk about Uganda for 5 seconds, okay? So part of it is, okay, let them think it's one country, but we are here to say, we the Africans want you dealing with these hotspots. And if you don't, it's not just, if you don't treat Uganda well, it's not just the Ugandans who will be mad at you. The Ghanaians will be mad, the Senegalese will be mad, the South Africans will be mad, the Egyptians will be mad. This is what I've been trying to push us to do.
Just one thing.
We're almost out of time. Maybe if you can answer the question, maybe to the final remarks. We're out of time, please.
My name is Tumain Geoffrey Tem.
We met here last time.
I'm introduced to the audience.
Okay.
I will say why my name. I thought too much, and I had something called Infrastructure United States of Africa. I'm an engineer, so we want us to unite infrastructure. Though it's political, but we don't tell them. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you for that. Let me just, by way of conclusion, say how deeply grateful I am for this opportunity. I will go back to Uganda at the end of April, satisfied and encouraged that there are people further afield across the Pacific who care deeply about what we're doing in Uganda, and hope to maintain contact with each and every one of you, people at TASSC, Mr. Akwi here, so that we can compare notes. Because those of us who are on the ground, who live through these experiences, do have to provide this information to many of you. The second one is that it is not easy doing what we do back home. We do this at huge personal costs. And just to share one story, when we filed a case in court to prosecute the IGP in Uganda, Mr. Kale Kaihura, we found a courageous magistrate who issued criminal summons to come for him to come to court to attend to his case. We were nearly lynched in the courthouse. He mobilized numerous people to come to court. They were intoxicated, they were drunk. They were coming to lynch the lawyers in the court case. So it's tough doing what we do in Uganda. And so we'll count on your support to ventilate our concerns in these capitals, and hopefully we can change our own situations. The last one is to say and we must thank Leonis and the folks here at TASSC for the incredible sacrifice and work they do to support the African diaspora here. We had a long discussion with the lawyers in this place to discuss actual cases that they can use for the work here. And I think that it is important to continue supporting people like Leonis and TASSC here for the work that they do. And I think for me, it's just good to see all of you. I like the red hats and red berets. I wear them when I'm not in official capacity. But just to say, just carry on. I think that it's not impossible. Eventually, I think if you don't change anything, at least get hard. Don't let people guess on where you stand on the question of the rule of law, human rights on the continent. If you are a Ghanaian, you're Ugandan, a Tanzanian, let there be no doubt as to where you stand, either with Magufuli's autocratic rule in Tanzania or Museveni's autocratic rule in Uganda. Let there be no doubt as to where you stand. If you stand with them, also declare, but we cannot afford to be defense sitters, right? We must take sides in this discussion. So I hope that we can continue this discussion, and when I return home, I'll be in touch with all of you if I can. And again, thank you, Ernest. Thank you for getting me here. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Please be safe. A good friend of mine is in Kenya. And he tells me, he said, why is your hair so white? And I said, that's because you are so great and I can't sleep. I worry about you all the time. So be safe.
Thank you, sir. I'll try my best.
He's the chairman of when MP was shot down in Tanzania.
He was the president of the Law Society.
Yeah, he was
Close
here.
friend of mine. Yeah.
He was here.
Thank you so much for everyone who came here. Thank you, Mr. Nicholas Opiyo. I think if we had like more time, there are more things we could have discussed. Now you know the influence of China on Africa. That is that is making U.S. lower even their standards for more to be able to compete with Chinese in Africa. And you know you cannot use football rules in basketball. So I think as we were discussing yesterday, I think U.S. should focus on human rights if China wants to focus on development. But I was listening to people complaining about the new electricity dam in Uganda that was launched yesterday. But the authority has openly said that they are willing to sacrifice the environment to the economic. You know, those are things that U.S. doesn't know what to do about that because they want to fight the Chinese, like the Chinese way, but you cannot beat them in doing that. So I think U.S. should focus on human rights, and we are lucky to be here in the U.S. So let's use that opportunity to be able to voice our opinions. And this is TASSC. You're always welcome. Ugandan community, African community. Here we help torture survivors. If you know someone who has been tortured psychologically or physically, we provide them with legal services, psychological services. We help them find jobs. We also do advocacy. That's what we are doing now. So if you want my card, grab my card when you're getting out. And yeah, we got some more pizza here and coffee. You stay around. Let's hang out. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Whoever will take it.
Say something to my people of Boston.
Oh,
introduce yourself.
People from Boston.
I'm from Boston, yes.
Yes, thank you, and let's continue to fight for human rights, and thank you for everyone.
Yeah, why don't you tell your names? And
my name is Leonce. I'm the director of the TASSC International. We help torture survivors.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.